This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Trevor Francis on the show. He is the founder and CEO of 46 Lab, which is an innovator in the telecom space. So we're going to talk a lot about that, including in improving global connectivity and how all that works. Anyway, with all that being said, Trevor, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on, John.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into the telecom space, and what it's been like to start 46 Labs.
Yeah, so I was actually dragged into the telecom space. I wasn't originally set out to, I didn't set out to be here. I had a project. My first project in telecom space was actually based in Honduras, and I was hired as a consultant to fix a problem with the local phone company there, where they couldn't get calls to complete properly. So at early 20s. I was in the jungles of Central America, working with working with some locals down there, trying to fix the problem, and we succeeded. And I guess the rest is history. So most of my early kind of formative telecom work was all done internationally, and generally in developing countries. So I got to see really some really interesting things down there, and it really, pre-internet type stuff, because the internet hadn't made it down there yet. Just pretty interesting. Yep.
Yeah, I can think back of my so it wasn't my first full-time job, but it was early on in my career. I had a job at a telecom in telecom space for about 9 years, and that was interesting. That was also pre-smartphone anyway. We had pagers when things went awry, and it was a fun time.
Well, it's funny because my first deal in Honduras was something they called radio phones, which were these fixed devices that use CDMA to connect, and they're literally hanging on the in a tree in the jungle to get people to connect. And one of the biggest issues is that international calling early on was super, super expensive, right? So to call Honduras was 25 cents a minute or 30 cents a minute or something crazy, right? And there wasn't WhatsApp and all these over the top, sort of applications where people communicated. So, the only way to call people was you pick up the phone in the United States or somewhere else and place a phone call, and it just magically rang down there, right? So it's kind of the beauty of the public switch telephone network. The problem is that those radio phones, they made these beeping sounds, and those beeping sounds basically told all the equipment on the head end, but a caller, that it was time to answer the call. So it would beep, the call would get answered, they would get charged for that phone call, but the person on the other end hadn't picked up the phone yet. So it's causing a huge issue. And when you multiply that times, tens of thousands or potentially millions of phone calls a day, it becomes a really big financial issue. So that's how we got started. Weird radio phones that were this big.
Yeah, I guess back when you had those audio tones kind of dictating things is when we had people out trying to hack phones with whistles and things like that.
Blue boxes and gray box. I got started right then.
Yeah. So tell me how all that has changed now, and where 46 Labs comes into play.
Well, so you would be surprised how much analog copper is still there in the United States today. So I would argue that we had more copper deployed than any other place on the planet, and that's just because we started, everything started here, right? So everything was copper based, and has moved to to IP transport now. Whereas in Europe and Africa and other places, it was native. There was no copper because it was natively, well, there's minimal copper. It was natively wireless to begin with because they were so far behind the adoption curve for technology. So there's less work necessary to kind of rip all that copper out. But today, everything is rapidly moving away from copper and into IP based transport. With we're about 75-25% of the way there.
Hmm. And do you see most of that in the rural areas, like way far away? And is there anything that the government's doing to try to help that along, or is it all private sector?
That's a good question. So we actually see it everywhere, and everyone seems to think that it's generally a rural problem. But the reality is that rurals were the first to actually put fiber to the home, and this was like early 2000s because they got funding to be able to do that. Where we're seeing a majority of the copper deployed right now is in large enterprises. So think like, large airlines that have deployed copper 40 years ago for the airports or for their maintenance facilities. There's a huge amount of copper still left in the enterprise space. And then carriers. So carriers, the entirety and for the most part, a lot of the regulatory environment is written around kind of a copper environment. So a majority of all of the interconnections that happen today with tier one carriers are all happening using copper. So it's you would never think that, right? You would think that would be the first place that they transitioned it. The reason why the adoption hasn't been faster is that there's been no real motivation from the carrier side of things to rip it out, because a transformation generally involves some sort of downtime, right? And considering that the only people left who are using copper or wireline phones to begin with are businesses, it means that they have to be tolerant to having downtime as this process happens, right? And the way the regulatory environments work is that downtime just means fines and really kind of headache for carriers. So there's a perverse incentive now to migrate away from copper, because the only positive thing that happens in that is that it they don't have to maintain it anymore. But the process to get there is it's painful and expensive.
Mm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I can go back to, I'm in rural South Carolina, and, I'm actually pretty close to Charlotte, but I was in a town a little bit further south, and we've had fiber to the prim in residential areas, for 25 years.
That's right. Yeah.
And, it's just shocking to hear that a lot of these, tier ones don't have connectivity that way. But then I think about it, I've gotten letters and notices from, in business offices from different vendors in the past several years telling us that they're no longer supporting POTS lines, and we would have to migrate off that or cancel service. And, when you have elevators and systems that require you to have some type of POTS lines, it gets a little tricky. Is that a growing trend?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think that you have, the regulatory environment right now requires, with like certain alarm panels, you're right. And, I mean, you'd be surprised how many people still use fax machines out there, specifically in healthcare and finance, right? So those things don't run over IT very well. Obviously, there's been some solutions that have been created to solve that issue, but there's still a pretty significant embedded base of copper there, primarily because of regulatory reasons and security reasons, frankly. So with security being such a big topic now, you generally don't have to worry about security with POTS lines, because you essentially outsource that obligation to the carrier, right? So when you now start introducing IP into the mix, then now you have another attack surface, you have nothing, another thing to secure, right? So that's also kind of created friction for a full kind of wholesale migration from copper over to IP.
So where does 46 Labs come into play when it comes to all this?
So we solved that whole problem, right? So everything that I talked about as being a principal issue is we step in and we help large enterprises and carriers actually make that jump, right? And we do it in a really unique way, because the biggest issue that we found beyond just the regulatory and security reasons is that you actually have to truck roll somebody out there to replace physical equipment that's there, right?
Mhm.
And the way we handle it is we actually do the transformation from the copper to the IP on the premise, either in the premise of the carrier or in the premise of the enterprise, allowing them to keep their existing copper footprint inside the buildings. And then everything, the last mile transport is all IP. So, or the carrier to carrier transport is all IP. So we're kind of federating the edge, and we're replacing everything, all the guts, on the inside. And that's like step one to getting everybody off copper. And then step two is just going a kind of a full IP, all the way to the device.
So when you go about something like that, you mentioned before one of the biggest headaches was downtime, and having to go through all the regulations and even the business expense, especially if you're a call center or something like that, or you do inside sales, that could be, cause a problem. How do you guys mitigate that?
Well, so copper is, I mean, it's very analog, right? Like you unplug something and you plug something back in, right? So the good news about it being so analog is it literally is you unplug it and you plug it back in, right? So that's the extent of the downtime. One of the things that I forgot to mention, which is probably as significant as just the regulatory piece of this, is that all of the systems that are written for billing and for provisioning and lawful intercept and all of that at the carrier level are all written around copper. So not only does all of the equipment have to change, all of the back-end systems have to change as well, right? Which is an extraordinary issue because you have to bring in consultants, you have to do a whole bunch of other stuff there, in addition to just replacing the equipment. So, one of the benefits that we have is that the existing provisioning and wireline kind of utilities that the carriers have been used to using, they get to keep using it because from their perspective, it just looks like copper. The only difference is that middle mile transport is all brought to IP, and then we connect the enterprise with the IP. So it's IP in the middle and copper at the edge.
Okay, so from the endpoint, they don't notice a difference,
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so that means like the smaller carriers can continue to use their AS400s and their old Cobalt roads and everything operate just fine, but they have the benefits of having a secure IP connection.
That's right. And frankly, at the higher level, so like the handoff between like wireline and wireless carriers right now is all IP, because most wireless carriers don't support TDM or copper-based interconnects anymore. So this is already happening. It's just happening deeper in the the carrier edge. It's interesting. Most people think that analog solutions don't work over IP. They're kind of like they're allergic to each other. One of the first projects that 46 Labs ever did was actually taking a modem product that was run by a large financial institution and converting it to IP in the middle, doing exactly what I'm talking about doing for the carriers. And we ran that for like 5 years before they had completely made their transition over. That's like unheard of because most people are like, you can't use modems or modems, right? And or fax machines or fax machines. You can't run them over IP. And we actually converted them to modems to TDM, moved it transport from IP, and then back to TDM again before it was handed off. And it worked for 5 years without literally no downtime during that period. So it's possible. We've done it before, and we're doing it obviously with large carriers and large enterprises today. It's just getting people, especially the folks that have been in the space for a long time, to say, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a try.
So how does this, I guess my question would be around latency. How does this, latency impacted with this? Because one thing with voice, you don't want, lagging. You don't want like choppiness. You want it to be clear, smooth, and concise. But a lot of times you're talking about transferring, a digital to analog signal, you're going to incur some sort of latency.
Yeah, it's not very much. If you do it at the edge. So if you're doing it, at the core, it becomes, that as volumes ramp up, the latency ramps up. And that's generally, that's generally how it works. When you do it at the edge, you're basically taking the problem and you're making it much, much smaller, because you have a lot more edge locations around you. Split the problem up, right? And that's kind of how we solve for the latency issues, is that we do the transport right, or the conversion right at the very edge, and we split it up so it's not happening all in one central location.
Okay. So it becomes pretty much unnoticeable to end users.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And that's the goal, right? The goal is for them,
Right.
for no one to notice anything happen.
Yeah. So when you do something like, is most of this done in software or is it in hardware? Or is it a combination?
It's both. So you still have to take IP, which is, fundamentally kind of software driven, right? And you have to convert it into something analog, right? Which is not, right. It's copper wire. So there is hardware necessary to do the conversion, but a lot of the intelligence and you mentioned latency, a lot of the kind of the way we overcome that is all using software intelligence at the transport layer, the middle mile layer, to know that if this leg of IP goes down, or we're having some sort of hiccup with it, or it's flapping or something like that, that we know to fail over with it. Because again, with analog, it's either works or it doesn't work, right? Generally. With IP, it's a lot more, it just takes a lot more monitoring.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess there's a lot more, but you also have a lot more resilience because you have different paths and multiple paths that you can go through. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the trade-off, right? So you trade off, it either works or it doesn't work. To, if it doesn't work, you actually have options with IP where you don't with analog.
Yeah. So, what is the future of all this transformation and things that are going on when it comes to, this industry? Where do you see this going, and what's kind of the next phase?
I think everything's going to go wireless. I think it will be wireless to the edge on everything. Not that I'm not bullish on fiber. I think there's been a huge initiative to move to fiber-based networks and things like that. The reality is that the cost per deployment for fiber versus doing wireless is, it's 10x, 20x what it is to put a 5G base station out in a especially rural in a specific geographic area versus running 5 kilometers of fiber to service one customer, right? And sure, that one customer, that fiber can support 100 gig, 100 gig connection, right? But is somebody in rural South Carolina really needing 100 gig connection to their house, right?
Yeah.
So probably not.
Yeah, that makes me laugh because just Friday I got a little flyer in my mail that says you're eligible for up to 8 gigs of internet. It's in my house. I'm like, what am I going to do with 8 gigs?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Am I going to?
Our router's only even 1 gig. So what am I going to do?
Well, that's the dirty little secret that no one really wants to mention, is that, okay, great, you can support all of this high bandwidth connectivity, but for what?
Exactly.
To do what? Right. So to watch Netflix.
Yeah, I couldn't even fathom. I was like, I don't have a device in my house that's more than 1 gig for starters. And then 80% of my devices are wireless, which then I'm, bound to whatever, version of Wi-Fi that's in, the TV or the iPad.
That's right. Yeah. So I think everything wireless is the future. And I believe fundamentally that pretty much every device you have in your house is going to be wireless, either 5G connected or Wi-Fi, connected.
So,
and I think the middle mile will be 5G.
Okay, so that's what I was going to get to. So usually, like right now, when you have a cell tower that's connected on the back end by fiber, but you're saying that those towers will be connected to each other through 5G.
No, I think the middle. What I should say. I think the last mile is going to be 5G, and I think the middle mile will always be fiber. So it has to be, right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. Yeah. And when you look at the really, far out small towns out there, I know a guy that works for me. He lives out in the middle of nowhere, and there's like 120 people in this town, this little co-op, and they were trying to get fiber in there. They still have, DSL.
Yeah.
And they've been pushing to try to get fiber, and the local telephone provider came back to him and said, it's going to be $150,000 to run fiber out here just because, we can't run it. 5G would be way cheaper to get that to them. So is that what you're saying?
5G or Starlink, right?
Starlink.
Obviously you've got, we didn't have options before, right? Like if if you lived rural, and frankly, I mean, even in 10 miles outside of a lot of metros, they still are, relying on like 1.5 meg DSL, which is just kind of wild.
Wow.
Depending on how, like in South Carolina and North Carolina, you have a ton of trees, right? Well, it's a real pain to trench around trees. And it's creating a lot of issues with actually getting deployment and cost, right? Like it's previously we were relying on like Dish Network, right? Like in those sort of situations where you had a really slow, had maybe fast download speed, but your upload speed was basically nothing, right? So I think Starlink has certainly solved some of those kind of real like deep rural issues, probably better than 5G, because even 5G is allergic to trees. So I think, I think we are marching very quickly towards a fully wireless future.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. What are the concerns or risks that we should be thinking about when it comes to wireless, especially when it comes to security and things like that? Because one of the things that, back in the early days of Wi-Fi, we always talked about physical security was always better because you had to plug into the network versus wireless. You can kind of intercept the signals.
Well, so I don't think about this in the terms of, kind of residential wireless anymore, but it's, now that everyone's been sent home or there's a work from home kind of focus. I mean, I'm in my house right now, and I think you're probably in your house right now. Philip is probably in the office, but in general, I think that you're going to see. So one of the benefits of, being physically plugged into something, whether it's plugged into a carrier or plugged into, an enterprise network, is that you're outsourcing your security to somebody else. So like in the carrier space, when you're plugged into a carrier directly, you're outsourcing that requirement to the carrier, right? To secure the network internally. And that's generally been good enough. When you're plugging into a physical wireline network, you're kind of outsourcing that to the core network, your core IT team to be able to do that. Where a majority of the attacks are happening are all at the user, at the edge. Somebody's left something open at the edge and they've been hacked, or they clicked on some sort of spear phishing email, and that's how they penetrated it, right? And then from there, they have access to everything in the core network at that point. I think that security is, the more you take the problem and you break it up into the transport to the individual user, it's a lot easier to see problems when they happen, because you see like that big flashing light on one of your users versus it penetrating a network, and now all the users actually have a big issue. So I think that you're going to see security become more discrete at the network level down to the user itself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's totally fair. You mentioned that, so wireless is kind of the future that you see things going, and I totally agree with you 100% on that. How does 46 Labs fit into that?
Well, we're working on some wireless solutions, both both private kind of private LTE 5G solutions, and then we have some things that are hopefully going to be announced here pretty soon that will transform wireless service and kind of transform enterprise connectivity in pretty drastic ways. So can't talk about it right now, but we do have some really neat stuff that are you could follow up with me on here pretty soon.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's say people are interested in learning more about that in the future. How can they connect with you online and maybe follow 46 Labs and learn more about the things that you guys are working on?
Sure. You can go to our website, 46labs.com. And we're very active on LinkedIn as well. So we have a bunch of folks on there who are, giving kind of industry updates and ways for enterprises and large carriers to improve their infrastructure. You can reach us in any other location.
Awesome. And I'll link those two in the show notes at geekleader.com, so people can go there, click through to 46 Labs or your LinkedIn, and follow you that way. Trevor, thanks so much for coming on the show and explaining some of those things to us. I think that's one of the things that we don't really hear enough about is, the past with telecom and communication and how that's changed to the future. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.